Hi, my name is Guy Lawrence, and thanks for tuning into my podcast today. If you're enjoying these conversations and you want to check out more of this transformational work, be sure to come back to guylawrence.com.au and join me as we go further down the rabbit hole. Enjoy the show. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, Guy.
I want to share something with you and everyone listening because I was actually with Pete Evans a few weeks ago, and he has a popular podcast here in Australia. And being a podcaster myself, one of the natural questions I asked him was, "What you've interviewed many people. Who stood out for you recently?" And he instantly said your name. He said Richard Rudd. I was like, "Fantastic! I must reach out." So I appreciate you coming on the show.
It's a pleasure.
And I ask everyone on the show, if you were at an intimate dinner table party right now and you were sitting next to a complete stranger and they asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
Yeah, it's always a good one, that. My wife has more difficulty with that than I do. Well, I over the years, I've kind of refined that one, and I used to go off onto all kinds of tangents. Now I just generally tell people, well, I'm a mystic, really. And they might say, well, what's that? And I say, well, when I was younger, I had a kind of spiritual experience that changed the direction of my life and set me off on a kind of spiritual journey, exploring lots of different viewpoints and studying with different teachers and masters and different disciplines all around the world. And I used my 20s really for that search. And then I started to, then things started to kind of coalesce inside me, and I started to write my own kind of wisdom and insights that came from inside me, based a little bit on the spiritual experience I had, in my late 20s. And and I just followed that track from there. And so now I'm a writer, an author, a spiritual teacher, a father, a husband. An ordinary
Amazing.
man. Yeah.
What's the general reaction? Because you wouldn't often hear somebody say a mystic or the mystical. And that was even a foreign concept to me growing up in Wales. It was about rugby for me, and it was so far removed.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
What would the reaction be? I guess, a lot of the time, sort of they don't really know, people wouldn't really know how to follow up. If they're a good listener, then they would probe. It doesn't take much to be a good listener. You just ask a few more leading questions, and then you sit and you wait, and interesting stories come out. And not everyone's like that. For various reasons, they have their own discomfort that sometimes can come up around like something that they can't easily frame. But so I guess over the years I've had all kinds of responses. Quite often, and even among the people I sort of hang out with, I don't talk widely about what I do unless there's one or two who are interested. But in the sort of like in for instance, the friends of my children or their parents, things like that, they might know a little bit about what I do because maybe they've heard I'm a writer, and but then they're just living their lives, and most people have too much going on to kind of worry who someone else is. But obviously friendships have developed and from people who are genuinely interested in others. So
yeah, amazing. Well, I can tell you I'm genuinely interested, and I'm sure some great stories will come up in the podcast today. But I was looking at on your website earlier, and I was fascinated because you do seem like a bit of an adventurer even before. And from what I understand, the turning point was when you were at the age of about 29, I think. And they were saying that you traveled the world. You sailed. You did an incredible sail across the Pacific as well.
The Atlantic, yeah.
Oh, the Atlantic, was it? Okay. And were you already looking into the spiritual side of things, the mystical side of things before you had your experience at 29? Like, was there a whole accumulation of events to bring you to that point, or you just randomly laying in bed one night and things went?
actually, it was from early on in my life. It's always been there. And I guess a seed that was kind of quietly growing, and it was a bit hidden in my teen years at school and things, because, you know, in that school environment, you kind of get into that teenage kind of image consciousness, which is very natural because you're trying to work out who you are. And generally you're playing a role that you're not. Well, that was my case anyway, a lot of the time. And, but slowly, I guess around 18, things started, you know, I fell in with some people, some younger people my age, who were sort of spiritual seekers and adventurers, and starting that journey. And that was a real turning point, to find a group of people like me. So that really kind of launched me, because then I fell in with this group and we started to explore, you know, all the different things we were exploring. So it's pretty rare, actually, to find, you know, nowadays it's a lot more common. There are a lot more younger people on, you know, aware of spiritual things and the spiritual kind of dimension. But back in then, especially in England, there wasn't a lot going on. But we were one of the first, probably early groups of people really interested, because there were teachers like Ram Dass and people who were circulating their teachings and things that come to the West that were more palatable to younger people, you know, because he had a great sense of humor and kind of warmth and engagement. So there were certain people like that, plus the people exploring psychedelics and stuff like that.
Okay.
That was a way in. That often is a way in for younger people. So that was sort of one of my ways in.
Yeah, incredible. Do you think, I often wonder about this, because where I grew up in Wales, there was nothing, and there was always a pull and a yearn and a search for me. I just couldn't, I had nothing to point me. There wasn't even a yoga studio. There was just nothing, you know, and I think because of that, I kind of aimlessly wandered on and continued to travel and just tried to put my finger on something I couldn't even describe that was going on within me. What do you think would have happened for yourself if you hadn't come across, especially at 18? I mean, it's amazing that you were looking at it then and then.
Well, you know, I had another path that was kind of unraveling, you know, the mainstream path, because I'm from a family of wine and spirit merchants. We're a very old family lineage in England, in London, and we have a 300-year-old wine shop in St. James's. And so it's one of the best known old lineage companies in the country, if not the world, actually. And so, but it's small family business. And so I was always really interested in wine, because I grew up with my father drinking as a connoisseur. He drank small amounts of really fine wine. And so at the table, we would always have wine, and there'd always be wine discussions. And so I learned and kind of developed a really good palate for tasting the subtleties and nuances in wines and foods as well, actually. But so I thought I was going to go in that direction. And of all the 3 children of my brothers and sisters, I was the one most likely to do that. And the opposite turned out to be the case. My sister's now in charge of the business. My brother is also a director, and I'm not in the business. But I'm actually still involved, because I have a foot in both worlds. But yeah, I would have gone off and done that. And everyone was a bit surprised when I didn't, you know, when I had this experience and then shifted direction rapidly.
Were they supportive?
They were.
Yeah.
My father was especially, my father, both my mother as well, but because he was the sort of the patriarchal figure in my life, obviously. And he was very yielding and philosophical and unworried. You know, I think he didn't quite know where to frame it, but I think he saw me as a romantic, you know. And that was okay for me. Like, I'm a romantic. I go off on adventures and journeys and things, and come back with stories. And he was okay with that.
Amazing. I'm asking you these questions as well, because I can draw parallels in some respects of what I've been through over the last 10 years, you know. And I was curious, and I see it in a lot of people that we work with here in Australia, that they start to experience this work and they start to have an opening want to lean in, but of course they've got their life that they've been living for the last 30 or 40 years and the job and the security. Was it hard for you to walk away from that? Or did you just, or were you so trusting and there was an inner knowing that you just had the courage to just go and do it and not worry?
I don't think it was hard. It was natural, you know.
Okay.
It was just, you know, it was that fork in the path, you know.
Yeah.
And there was the path less traveled. And as an adventurer, I was like, oh, I'm definitely going down that one. I don't know where it's going to lead me. And it did lead me to, you know, to periods of angst and kind of self-doubt, of course, because that's part of it, you know, and particularly later in my 20s when, you know, a lot of your friends are kind of, they've got good jobs, you know, or they're getting married and having kids. And I was still out there, you know, I hadn't had any of that. There was no stability in my life at that level. And I think that kind of caused some questions inside me of like, you know, is this going to, how long is this going to go on?
Yeah, fair enough.
Where's it going to take me?
And do you mind sharing a bit about the experience that happened?
Sure.
Yeah, because it feels like a big turning point.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's like there are lots of mutations in our lives, or, you know, that, and sometimes they all add up to a transmutation, a big shift. But so all the little ones are just as important, you know. So I remember flashes in my early life where I saw things or kind of had strong impulses. Like I remember in my early teens, 13 or 14, I was just driving along next to my mum somewhere, and I suddenly had the kind of just out of nowhere, teenager, suddenly had the deep knowing that I had the ability to touch someone and instantaneously heal them. You know, that was, and I had that kind of, that's just like, oh my God, not just me, but anyone. I had that kind of flash of like anyone, everyone has that capacity. I don't know where it came from, but it was very strong, little, like one of those little early murmurs of something. And so I slowly kind of realized that anything in life is possible. But yeah, then came this experience where I woke up one morning in my bed, and it was quite unusual in that sense that I actually woke up from my sleep into a new day, you know, into a new me. And I woke up and I was just in this altered state. I woke up into it. And
when you say when you say altered state, like you were in a meditative state, waking up, and you're like,
I was just, there was just light coming through my body. I didn't know how to express it. Like there was light coursing through my body. And another way I've sometimes described it as there was no resistance in me at any point, at any level. There was not even a kind of sliver of resistance anywhere in my body, you know. So all resistance was instantly taken from me, and I could just feel the you know, the intelligence of the cosmos just flowing through me without a single resistance. And so I was on fire. I was aflame with this.
Was you scared?
No, oddly, I was kind of rapturous. You know, I was like, whoa. And I just went with it. There wasn't anything else to do. And I just followed the light, the intelligence. And it told me what to do. It didn't tell me with words. It just showed me so clearly, because there was no resistance. So it was just so clear. It was almost like my life started to unravel, you know, choicelessly over those 3 days. It lasted 3 days and 3 nights. And I didn't really sleep, but I kind of was in this
3 days and 3 nights.
Yeah. And I went on a journey in those 3 days and nights throughout Britain. In fact, I ended up in Wales.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And I ended up on, don't know if you know Bardsey Island.
No, I don't.
So it's a tiny little island off the north coast of Aberdaron, the Lynn Peninsula. And I'd never been up there, but that was where I was kind of taken, and on this weaving journey through experiences and meeting people and having insight, because the whole journey was also, it was at an archetypal level. So in a way, over the journey that I took from my home in Sussex to the ending of it, which was on Bardsey Island, it was the entire life of the cosmos was enacted, in those 3 days. I can't explain that, but every single aspect of the universe and its storyline was encoded in those 3 days, in little events and things that happened and people I met and things, and it was like everything was a symbolic thing. So at one point I went to a wedding, and then I understood the symbolism behind weddings and marriage and yin and yang, and I just understood things at a visceral level that was cosmic, that saturated my whole being, and it enabled, it's sort of, yeah, even to the end, like the end, I was sitting on this little hill on top of this remote little tiny island. I was probably one of just 2 or 3 people on the island, and then as I sat there on this hill, the experience fell away down into the earth. It's like slid off me back into this little hill and into the earth and down into the core of the, I felt myself coming back to ordinary consciousness, and that was it. And then I was there, just left this guy sitting on a hill going, what do I do now?
Exactly. And what did you do then from that point?
Well, I kind of found a boat and went home, and there was a guy coming, because I had to get there was a local fisherman who took me out there. It was not an island that had a sort of regular trip out to. And it turned out it was the Isle of the Saints. It's called the Isle of the Saints. It's one of those blessed Welsh islands. It has a lot of myths around it. Where Merlin was buried. It's where, it's called the Isle of the 20,000 Saints, I think. And there's this sort of legend that there are 20,000 saints buried there. And it's a very, so it's a lot of myths and legends around it. And I definitely, was immersed in those at the time. And then, then I was an ordinary guy again. And so the guy came to pick me up at the end of the day, and I went home and, tried to make sense of my life for the next 7 years.
Yeah, right. Wow. And then is that what? No, it's not. I can imagine. Holy shit. So when you have an experience like that, because I remember having, like I was talking about a meditative experience that I had no idea was even possible, and I just couldn't go back to normal life after that. Like I was ready for it, even though I didn't know I was ready for it. I was scared of it, but I loved it at the same time. It was like this whole mix of emotions. And then, of course, there's integration and going on. Did you know then you just had to write this book and get it out? Like, was that then?
No, I didn't know anything. I came back, and then I had, as I said, I think I had a good 7 years of life where I was a bit adrift.
Okay.
So I was literally adrift.
Wow.
It was like I'd been left alone with this wisdom, like leave him to it, see what happens, and I went through.
Were you lonely then, or did you have any low points for that 7 years, or was it just?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I had mad points. I had low points. I experienced depression for the first time in my life. I had a phase of Messiah complex, as you can imagine. I'd given this knowledge. I had these memories of my previous existence and my future existence and all of that. And I just saw everything. And so when I came back, it was hard to incorporate that into, I'll tell you a strange little bit of the story. I didn't try really often share this, but about 3 days after I got back and I was, back in my ordinary consciousness, I had to get up I was delivering something for my girlfriend at the time. And so I went to a little town, I was delivering it to the stranger, and I took this package and I got the address and I went to this house, and it was just a simple thing. And then the woman came to the door of this house, and she opened the door and she saw me and she said, "Oh, it's you." And I'd never met her in my life. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I'm a medium, and I've been getting messages all night. I haven't slept a wink, and it's about you. And if I know this sounds weird, but if you come in, I'd like to kind of some things to tell you. And this was like a complete weird freak event, 3 days after my experience. So I went in, and she sort of drew the curtains. So she was old school medium. You don't see many of them around nowadays. Like old school. Like she hadn't been to any workshops or courses. She was just like, she was bought. She had the gift from an early age. Her mother taught her. She was like this. Really bona fide kind of woman, but nothing mystical about her. Although there was a huge amount. She was just incredible woman. Anyway, so she went into a trance and then started to relate to me a lot of the things that happened over the last 3 days for me that she couldn't possibly have known, and intimate details, including places, names. And I was utterly blown away. I was like, oh my, all the experience started to come back in me. That consciousness started to kind of come back up in me. And anyway, so we kind of finished our session. I delivered the parcel and went off. And I was quite high from that for a few days because it was an external confirmation. It was external validation. Yeah. And it was a strange thing that I think if I hadn't had that experience, and I never saw her again, and I never tried to see her again. If I hadn't had that experience, it would not have lasted. I don't think I'd have lasted the course because one of my stages was denial. At the time I went into denial. I thought, I just want an ordinary life. I just want to be an ordinary person. I've had, it's too hard, this. And so I went into denial. I said, that didn't really happen. It can't have happened. I wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. And but because I'd had that experience of the confirmation, that didn't stick for long, that denial, because it just kept going back. Well, then why did that happen? That was real. You could ring her up now and she'd confirm it. So I carried that. It was like an extra little gift that the gods gave me that made sure that I carried on my path. So strange things, and unbelievable. I'm making it sound like my life's very mystical, and most of the time it isn't. But those days, those were bizarre experiences.
There's the whole thing. No, thank you for sharing. That's brilliant. It's incredible. And do you think the 7 years you went through was necessary to sort of almost take the experience full circle? If I don't know if that's the best way to put it.
I think it's an essential part of like transformation, is the integration phase. And there's a tradition that cellular integration takes 7 years because of the 7-year cycles of our cells. I needed to go through all that totally. When I look back now, and it was a very difficult time, I needed it, and to kind of ground into, find a way for all that to come into me and settle again inside myself, which eventually I did. And then I met my wife and got married and got very grounded and had a kid and my first child. And that really, actually, you wouldn't think it, but that was the time when the teaching started to really flower in me, because I had this feminine, very earthy person, very real in terms of the world, not particularly mystically aligned as I was, spiritual in her own way, but kind of just a good, really beautiful, gracious woman. And then we were just bringing up a child, and it was then that things started to kind of fall in. I was grounded. I was an ordinary person, but I hadn't lost my extraordinary part inside. So I was able to follow it and carry on. And then I had a second experience, actually, but that's another story.
Well, we got time. Yeah, I will have to get. That's incredible. So, and it's amazing. It's so the 7 years, and that's coming in. You got married. You had a child, and then because I know you've got this incredible book out called The Gene Keys, and And from what I mean, I'm new to it, right? So I've literally just been glancing over and preparing for the podcast, and I did the test on your where you put your date of birth in and everything today, and it came back, and I was looking, I was like, oh my god, that I resonated with so many things that was said straight away. I encourage everyone to try that. But my point, I guess, what I'm getting to is, well, how did that start to evolve? I'm just on your kind of lifeline timeline here.
Yeah, well, part of my journey was to, kind of, it's almost like I was given, in those first 3 days, I was given like a jigsaw puzzle, and I was shown the whole puzzle. The puzzle was a living thing. I was shown the whole thing complete.
Wow.
And all the individual pieces, and then it was all taken away. But maybe the outside was left, like I'd done the borders, and I was like, oh my goodness. So I had the outside, and then as I lived my life, piece by piece was given to me, and often another person would actually be a piece. Like my wife was a big piece, my child was a piece, experiences were pieces, teachings or teachers were sometimes pieces, big pieces. So one of the early big pieces, I studied a system called human design. I was very drawn to that through some encounters I had that were quite mystical in nature, like synchronicities. And then I went to America to find the founder of that system, and a very unusual man named Ra Uru, who's an incredible genius, really strange man though. And I spent a lot of time studying with him and his kind of crowd around him, and learned that system very well. And other systems as well. Like many of us, I explored the chakras and all these other things, and I integrated them in the Kabbalah. But for me, I didn't do a lot of formal study. I just found my own way with it, as though I was remembering it all, and I had to bring all these pieces together inside me, and then that contemplation of all that wisdom started to give birth to something new inside me, as the puzzle started to form, and then I started to write this book, The Gene Keys, which was a contemplation of the I Ching, really, the Chinese I Ching. It's a big book.
Wow, that's a big book. Yeah.
It's got a lot of pages, and that took about 7 years to write it, actually. So it was another 7-year cycle writing that book, because I took each of the hexagrams of the I Ching, which were part of the, which was the system that was sort of central for me. Okay. And I studied also with a really amazing Chinese master called Ching, who I went to see in America, and he's like a master of the I Ching, and amongst other things. And so I kind of got a transmission of him, and then another Taoist teacher, Mantak Chia, who many people will know, he's very public, and I studied also under him for a long time. And that was more like internal alchemy and things, and meditation. And then I started to write this book, or it started to kind of come through me as I contemplated these things of the I Ching. But I didn't have knowledge of it. Like, I put all knowledge aside, and I just let it come from within me. Wow. So I would take a chapter, and I took them at random. They kind of came spontaneously, because there are 64 of these hexagrams, these symbols in the I Ching, and each one is the foundation of a kind of a worldview, if you like, an archetype. And the reason it's called Gene Keys is because our code, our genetic code, is made up of 64 codons, and so it's a pattern that's inherent in our biology and in all life on this planet, and all life that we know has this same code, and it's there imprinted within many structures in nature that we see. So it's there in the patterning of nature, and it's there in the ratios of the architecture of nature, and it's also possibly there, although I know I can say possibly because it hasn't been proven yet by science, but it's there it's the foundation of time space continuum itself. The matrix of all existence is a 64-fold geometry. sacred geometry.
Huh.
You want to see Nassim Haramein for that. He's a great
I'm
physicist.
trying to,
You can have
yeah.
him on the podcast.
I'm doing my best to get him on. He's a legend, yeah.
And ask him about the 64 when you get him.
Okay.
And he will explain beautifully. But anyway, so it's an imprinted pattern. And so I realized I was going into the universal pattern in writing this book. So I took a chapter, let's say it was 29, and then I went into that code. But I didn't use the traditional versions of the I Ching. I just put it all aside. I went, okay, teach me, what's the 29? You know, what's it about? And I got 3 words for each one, you know, at different levels. And that's the foundation of the book and the teachings of the Gene Keys, is these 3 words for each archetype. So 29, for example, it has a shadow. They have shadow, which is the low state, the victim state. And then it has a gift, which is the creative flowering once we transform the shadow. And then it has a siddhi. A siddhi is a Sanskrit word meaning divine expression or enlightened expression. And that's what flowers out of the creative gift. So it's a journey. Each one's a journey: shadow, gift, siddhi. You could say seed, flower, fruit. And so they represent the transformational journey of consciousness in all its different forms.
Amazing.
So 29, for example, the shadow is half-heartedness. And so anything you do half-heartedly is something that lacks power and something that lacks the capacity to really be successful for you or to fulfill you. So don't do anything half-heartedly.
Yeah.
It's better not to do anything at all than do something hard. And that's relationships, that's job, that's, anything. You live your life. Don't live it. If you're living half-heartedly in some way, then you're kind of losing energy. And the shadow is all about that. But if you can see that, if your awareness finds that pattern, then and spots it and just sits with it, then you begin to kind of release that its hold on you, and maybe you'll let go of the pattern or the relationship or whatever it is. And the gift in half-heartedness is commitment. So the purpose of half-heartedness is to realize you're not committed and then find something that you are committed to. So the beauty is that, commitment's incredibly powerful. You do anything in a committed way, you're guaranteed to succeed at it. And even if it fails on the outside, you're guaranteed to be fulfilled and get wisdom, right? And then the highest level, the siddhi, is devotion. So you have half-heartedness, commitment, devotion. Devotion is when your commitment has no longer become a force in you. It's no longer become a discipline. It's effortless. It's effortless. And it's certainly not about the thing anymore.
Yeah.
Suddenly so a relationship that comes from devotion, you see those relationships, someone that spent 20, 30, 40 years committed to someone, really giving their heart and learning or anything as well, eventually they break through to devotion. It's another whole level. It's like, wow, it's effortless. Suddenly everyone becomes the beloved, or everything becomes, this
Totally.
universal love. So that's an example of what a gene key is, and they're all applicable to all of us. But they also, like you said, there's a profile which gives you specific ones that relate to your awakening.
I was going to say, okay, is there like the roadmap? Because if you got 64, I know what I would do. If I have that book tomorrow, I'm like, right, which one is going to relate to me the most at this point in time?
Yeah.
And is that where the birthday comes from? Well,
there are lots of ways into the gene keys. And the most popular way is through the profile, which is where I kind of borrowed from human design, that first system. And because that was the system that connected birth time to the I Ching. And so I used that as a way, a wonderful way of just exploring these keys. It had a completely different approach, and these, what was revealed to me was these sequences of gene keys that relate to different awakenings So there's a sequence of these keys that relates to our awakening in relationships. So it's only applicable to the heart and our relationship journey, for example. And then there's one that's about prosperity, that's about our success financially and in health. And so there are different areas that the profile leads us into. And there's an unraveling, a natural unraveling that you explore. So when you come into the Gene Keys, it's a journey. It's a mystical journey of unraveling, of learning. It's not a kind of quick fix. You come in and you'll be here for a few years. You'll be in it, and you'll come in, you'll meet the community, and you'll explore it in your own way. Everyone has their own way. Some people like explore it solo. Others like to explore it in partnerships or in groups or in a community. And through, which is very rich, because you have reflections and mirrors and people that
of course,
people that wind you up, and people that so there's a lot of growth in that. So yeah, it's a rich journey, and the profile is one way, and there are other ways in as well that don't involve birth time as well. So
okay. Yeah. And then I'm imagining, then I'm just speaking for everyone listening today, there'll be processes and practices to be working through when contemplating as well, because I know contemplation is a big part of it, I'm assuming. And is it through the contemplation it's allowing it to reveal itself? Your shadow self? Because we don't even spot our shadows half the time, because we're running on so unconscious.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, after I'd written the whole Gene Keys book and all that, and people started working with it all around the world. I realized, it was quite difficult. It's a chunk of material, so not everyone could get into it that easily. It was for people who like the deep end, who jump in the deep end, who love wisdom and really up for it. But people who sort of aren't used to swimming like that and just wanted to dip their toe in, I kind of realized it wasn't easy for them. So I wrote another very short book, which is this one, The Art of Contemplation. It's very thin. It's under 100 pages, and it goes right to the core. It's the central technique. And I realized at a certain point, this is the technique that unlocks wisdom, wherever you are, whatever kind of wisdom it is learning how to contemplate. And it's the simplest thing. It's why it's under 100 pages, because it's so simple. Anyone can do it. Everyone already does bits of it, and it's not that hard to increase it in one's life, that through a very simple technique. And the foundation of that technique is learning how to pause, So it has 3 levels: pausing, pivoting, and merging. And if you get the first one right, the other 2 happen on their own. So pausing is just literally creating space in your life and noticing things, right? And noticing when a pause comes in your life. And there can be long pauses and short pauses. And when you kind of begin to unravel, this teaching of, how to contemplate, and you realize that you're kind of, what we realize is that, especially in our modern world, is we don't pause hardly at all, and because we're trying to get from A to B all the time, and it's a straight line. And pausing is all about curves. It's more feminine. It's like, take your time. Contemplation is not a fast word, right? So it's a poetic way of living that just allows you to relax. So, for example, in the book, at the back of the book, I give all these examples of ways I have learned to pause. So if I'm going one morning to work, let's say, I mean, I work from home mostly. So, but if I had to go to work and I had to walk through the town to get to my thing, or I had to take the train or the bus or whatever, if you're a contemplator, then you would leave half an hour early or 20 minutes early or something, in order that you could take a meandering route, a longer route, or instead of taking a bus, you might walk. And so that you could relax during that half hour. And you might go through a market and just listen and smell, maybe stop and talk to someone, you know, or you might go along the river and just listen and watch and think. And when you get to work, imagine the different state of mind you're in than if you've rushed, you know, because you'd left it just to the line, you know, like most of us do. You got there and there's no pause. There was just this kind of rushing to get there, and then you're A to B, and then you get there. Whereas this meandering, lingering, sauntering energy is what actually unlocks wisdom, because you have time to take life in, to listen, to see your own thoughts, to, you know, so it really is so simple. And I talk about harvesting pauses, because once you're switched on and you're listening for pauses, you realize they're coming at you all the time. And you realize that nature does it all the time. You know, like if you're out listening and watching and paying attention around you, there are so many, you know, a day filled with little pauses is a magical day. You know, you get to the end of that day and you just feel great. You feel like you've had space, you haven't been in a rush. If you've had a problem or a challenge, you've had space to contemplate it, to unlock its, perhaps its secrets. And that's where pivoting comes in, the second stage. Because inside a pause is the potential for a pivotal experience, a breakthrough, you know. And if we don't have the pause, we don't have the breakthrough. So contemplation is a wonderful field. It's very easy to kind of adopt, you know, and so that's why it's such a short book, because it's so easy. But I kind of, my joke is that if I'd written that book first, I don't think anyone would really be interested, because it's too easy. But people are really drawn by the complex. Like the main Gene Keys book has so many concepts and sort of so much woven into it.
Yeah.
That we're like, wow, that must be really full of something deep. But actually, the little thin book has got the essence.
The wisdom.
Both are meant to go together.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, it's brilliant. It's triggered a few thoughts. One is like, it was interesting because after my own personal experiences, once I had the experiences, I had this navigational point that I understood from an embodied experience, but I hadn't actually put words to it. I hadn't read many books or things to it. And then all of a sudden I was then drawn to what I was reading to support my experience, if that makes sense. So I felt like I was doing it the other way around, where in the past I probably had, in my mind, it was this really complex, difficult thing that I had to chase and get to reach, to then create my happiness from the learning of it all. But then it's just been a really interesting dynamic to observe in myself. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well, because we have a 7-month-old daughter, so our first baby, and talking about pauses now, I take her for long walks every day. And it's just been a big part of my life now, because that's how I get her to sleep. She loves it. I'll push her in the stroller and she falls asleep, and I go around the streets like I'm seeing parts of my neighborhood I didn't even know existed, you know. And it forces me to pause, because I have a business, a company too, and I'm chasing. I catch myself chasing sometimes, and it's like that dance of actually letting that go to allow to be with everything that I have right here, right now, which is my world, my family, you know. But I still have that dance constantly.
Yeah.
You know.
It's such a simple thing can change a life so easily and so quickly as well.
So what did it feel like when you accomplished and finished that book? I have to ask you, because it's a complex book. It took you 7 years to write?
Yeah. Because I wrote it first, shared the first layer of it online with a group who subscribed, and then so I'd done 64, and then I wrote the introduction, because then I was okay, I'd written it, how do I understand it, how do we use it, so then I wrote the introduction. Then I went back through it another couple of years and just gave it a second kind of sweep and padded it out, and then new parts came, and I sort of, you know, like a garden, you know, I just really they'd grown a bit inside me, so clipped a bit here, added a bit there, filled in there, moved something there, until it was perfect, as perfect as it felt for me anyway. I felt like, okay, I'm done. Yeah, so it felt, it was a big feeling, actually. I felt when I finished it and put the last full stop on it, I just had the feeling of like, wow, that's some book. You know, I had a knowing that that book was going to last a long time, and that it had its own destiny and its own sort of dharma, and that it had a community of souls connected to it.
Wow.
And so I that was a mystery for me. I was like, wow, I wonder who's going to come. You know, that was really exciting for me. So now people are coming and have been continuing to come and have their own journey with that book, and it's a way in. It's not the easiest way in for everyone, but it is a way. Yeah.
Oh, 100% it is. Yeah. And I love the concept of the shadow, the gift, and the divinity that comes through. And there was a quote, I just want to touch on something before we wrap up the podcast, because within that, I often wonder about the suffering sometimes that we have to go through in life. Do you think we are born and we come here to, is that where our growth is? Because there was a quote I pulled off your website: peace is hidden in the conflict. And I found that fascinating. And I thought I'd love you just to talk and touch on all that for me a little bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, anyone that sort of reads that book or comes and explores the gene keys, you know, you get the same message over and over and over again imprinted wherever you look, because the gene keys are a synthesis. So it goes off into lots of different areas. And people come to it like, wow, it's just so many realms, and it's constantly expanding as well. But it's the same message, which is that our suffering, our shadow, is where is here in order to help us evolve. It is the kind of raw material of our evolution, and we're in a currently humanity is in.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah, is
in a transitionary stage of really ripening. You know. Because that suffering inside us at an ancestral level is kind of ripening, and that means that we've been given these opportunities to really kind of transmute it, like transmute all the karma from our past individually and as a species. And this is very much in the book, and because you just started, you know, I'd recommend you read the 55th gene key.
Okay.
Which is the sort of longest one. It's the most prophetic. It stands out alone, and its sister gene key is 22. They kind of match, and the 22 is another long one, and it's all about the nature of suffering and why suffering is here, and how suffering ultimately leads to grace, and it has grace hidden within it. But that's a hell of a thing to say to someone who's deep in suffering, but actually deeply embedded in every atom of suffering is the potential for grace. But it's a journey to reach that grace. And then you also have to understand what grace is. You know, grace is, you know, the transcendence of death, of fear. And so that's what we're ripening into. And so in the Gene Keys teachings is a very prophetic, it's for our time. These are teachings of wisdom for our time, because we're making a transition, and in a few hundred years or 1,000 years or whatever it is in time space, we are going to be a different kind of species where we no longer have to learn from suffering. In fact, the next phase of our evolution, according to me and what I saw and experienced, and it's embedded in the teachings, is we're going to learn from bliss. You know, because we have a whole period of our evolution where we learn from suffering. And the whole next period of our evolution, we learn from bliss. And I tell you, there are as many layers and nuances in bliss as there are in suffering.
Wow.
And it's just another whole epoch that's coming. But there has to be a lot of clearing and cleansing and purification, and, you know, for us to make the transition to that next phase. And most people just, like, they hear that and they're like, what the hell is bliss? But if you do any exploration into like Indian spirituality, or any realized teacher will tell you that bliss is the nature of being, you know, and that deep inside every human heart is embedded endless eternal joy. And I know that's a tough one for people, but if you learn to meditate, or you go on these journeys and you go through the shadow material and you begin to transmute it, that is the revelation. Every single inner seeker will find the same revelation, that deeply buried inside every human being is an inexhaustible wellspring of goodness and joy, and that is blissful, because it's the nature, our nature for our being is eternal, right? So our true home is eternity. That, you know, that is a sentence to contemplate. Yeah. Our true home is eternity, you know, and then we break through the fear of death, we break through the suffering, all the walls of that fall away. And so that's the spiritual journey. It's the timeless spiritual journey. Gene Keys is just another set of routes through that timeless journey. Many people can do it without any structures at all. Those, you know, but structures are useful, you know, scaffolding is useful.
100% it is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so beautifully explained. Are you, with everything that's going on in the world, like, are you hopeful? You know, do you think we're kind of getting the message and moving into this way, or do you think it's going to still be a while?
Well, it's sort of beyond hope for me, because it's kind of moves into knowing. Okay. And it, you know, as I just said, like, that's our base reality. Yeah. So whatever happens, it's taking us to that reality, however long it takes, whatever journey it follows to get there, that's where it's going. And if we know that's where it's going, and if we can contact that place inside us more and more regularly, then whatever it looks like on the outside is just the scaffolding. It's just the storyline. And that doesn't diminish our empathy or our kind of sense of injustice or all those human virtues that we have embedded in us, because that's then part of our journey, you know, that we're the actor or the actress, that, you know, those are our journeys to follow. If you feel injustice, follow it, you know, stand for justice. If you feel, you know, compassion, then, you know, and service, follow that, you know, follow the cities inside you, follow the gifts inside you, dig into those shadows and follow your specific, you know, wear your costume well in the journey.
Yeah.
And yes, we're in a phase of just kind of chaos, where the outer systems are kind of beginning to fall into decline, and the earth herself is activating a higher intelligence in some way in order to push us through the next phase, you know, and she's going to do that in lots of different, very, very uncomfortable ways. Because, you know, awakening, it's a birth, right? It's like a birth. And birth can be, you know, testing, painful. You know, any mother will say, but because you got to go through these contractions, these, you know, and it can be ecstatic. Yes, I know. It can also be very traumatic and painful, and probably it's both at the same time. Yeah. So that's what we're in. That's what we're feeling. You know, the main thing is to work together to, you know, there's simple truths: pause often, come into harmony, move from your heart, you know, timeless truths. Work with community, you know, build bridges, that's what I keep saying to everyone: build bridges, don't build silos, build bridges.
Yeah, no, I love it. I know it's simple truths, but, you know, it's not so bad up here where I live, up near Byron Bay, but, you know, you go into the cities, people are just on all the time. And, you know, you can see how just having a pause and slowing down would have a huge impact in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got one last question for you. I always wrap up the shows with this, Richard, and that is, with everything we've covered today, is there anything you'd love to leave our listeners to ponder on?
Well, I think, as I said at some point, like we're very attracted to the complex, and we don't realize how simple things actually are. The best things in life are really simple. So, just that, like, if I like to keep things practical. Like, if you didn't take anything from any of this, if you only took one thing, it would be to go out in your day today or your day tomorrow and harvest some pauses. Look around, look at nature, listen to nature. Just allow it in a bit, allow some space in in your life, even just 2 or 3 moments, whether it's you decide just to sit quietly and do nothing for 5 minutes, just that is so powerful. And choose your time of day. And what I like to do is get up before dawn, just before the sun comes up, and just sit. I have tea. I love tea, little things of tea. And I drink a little bit of tea and I just sit and I listen. And it changes my whole day because I've had that pause at the beginning. You can also do it at the end, when night is falling. It's a magical time. And mostly it's our busy time. But if you said to your family or whatever, and you say, look, I'm just going to take like half an hour tonight. Is that right? Just while just you do the supper and think, I just want to go and sit outside and just watch the night descend, and do, the simplest things in life are the most rewarding. And it just connects us back to the source of being, which is in nature. And you don't have to be outside, even you can be inside, but outside is really beautiful, because there's something about the sounds, the airs, the perfumes, the changing light. So pause, take some pauses, and then see magic growing in those pauses. It's like in your garden. If you've got full of weeds everywhere, nothing can grow. But if you clear a few spaces here and there, and then you just watch what happens, you'll be amazed. Birds will drop seeds in there. Some of the weeds will come back. Other things will change. But then, just create some space and see what happens. That's my parting.
Perfect. Mate, you took me back to my childhood then. I was like growing up near the forestry and the fields and the rivers and the fishing as it was getting dark, and I was fishing and that. Like, it's just amazing. Really took me there.
That's exactly. Yeah. Those simple, beautiful things can change a life.
Yeah, totally. Like, everyone listening to the podcast, there'll be links below to check out the gene keys, and like I said, be sure to take the free opt-in that you have, which is all around the date of birth and your gene keys. Like, I did it today. It was great. I'm gonna have a bigger read of that. But are you on social media as well at all?
YouTube is my main one. I do a lot of 10-minute short videos. But also a nice way to stay in touch is if you get your profile, tick the little box that says get the mailing. And once a week we send out called the Pulse, and what we do is we give you the gene key of the week, and it has a little image and a quote, and it's and usually a link to a video I've just done or something, or a series I've put out. Yeah. And it's a really nice way of staying in tune with what's moving through the planet, because you get the gene key of the week. So this, it might be this week it's the 41st gene key, which is it is about beginnings. It's about fresh beginnings, and so it kind of, each one gives you a backdrop, and it's quite interesting because you're then in this rhythm. That's why it's called the pulse. You're in the pulse of the universal pulse, and it's a nice way to stay connected to what I'm doing. And
beautiful. Well, I look forward to keeping an eye. I'll subscribe to that too, so I'll start watching the YouTubes for sure, Richard. I have no doubt, mate. That was amazing today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate everything you do. And I look forward to sharing this with everyone.
Yeah, and let me know how you get on as you explore it more, and I'm really happy to kind of give you pointers. And one thing I recommend is I've just released a little online course, The Art of Contemplation, which is it's very easy, accessible. It's only $35. It's really ridiculously affordable, and it's a little online self-study course where I'm reading that book and there are pauses built into it for you with little tasks to go and do, like in your daily life.
That's
just to help
awesome.
you, a little bit of structure,
Yeah,
so that you have the book, but you can also, it gives you that little bit of an extra kind of encouragement just to take your time and try this today and try this today, and then when you've done this, move on to the next thing, but have a pause first, and those kind of things. So yeah,
I love it.
lots of nice.
Yeah, my wife will be up for doing that with me. I'll be sure
really
to do
simple.
it.
It's right on the front of my site. If you go to the landing page, the first homepage, it's advertised there because I've just brought it out, and it's receiving a lot of interest because it's so affordable and it's so simple. It's a nice way to kind of get started.
Absolutely. Brilliant. I'll be sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you, and let's stay in touch.
Likewise, 100%.